Okay, hello. Um, this is Simchat Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. My name's Gene, and we are beginning our Wednesday um, Bible study online and closing up, almost done with the book of Galatians. Um, you can find us here. You can check the channel page there on YouTube and um, good. I'm all blanked out today. And check out the whole study, the whole course in Galatians. We're just about done. Okay. Um, so settle in. It's still not quite 6 o'clock. We're here Wednesdays at 6 o'clock in the evening, um, California time, and we'll be here. I'm looking into what we're going to do next after we're done with Galatians is do a course on halakha. Halakha is basically a study of what to do, how to live your life in a manner that oh, shalom Vince, shalom Seth, God bless you guys. Um, and we are going to be looking into how do you live a holy lifestyle as a believer. And that's kind of what halakha literally means, the walk, out of Amos 3:3. And if you remember from your readings a couple weeks ago, that was in our haftarah portion. And how can two walk together except they be in agreement? And that's what halakha is all about: us agreeing to walk with God's commandments in God's ways. And of course, the question is, how do you do that? And that's where we get into halakha. Okay, I'm still going to vamp here for a few minutes to see if anybody else is going to come along. Um, so let me do my YouTube-ness and explain a few things before we get started. This is Simchat Yeshua Messianic Fellowship, and that is spelled SIMCHAT YE, Yeshua, YESHUA. I've only been doing this how many years? YESHUA. So Simchat Yeshua, it's actually all one word, .org for the website, and we also have a Facebook page with Simchat Yeshua, all one word again. Um, and if you are interested, we do have handouts for all the studies. They should all be posted on the website, and maybe even posted on the Facebook page. I've been running kind of on a minimum with as far as my eyesight's concerned, because so I'm not reading everything, I'm not going everywhere a lot, so I'm just not keeping up yet with all the stuff that I do for that I would normally do in my researching and stuff. So just hang in there, bear with me. Today happens to be a little less than as good as it has been in the past, or little less beneficial. So I've already, you've been hearing me all the time. I've been struggling with reading text, and it's going to be a little bit worse today, I'm afraid. So just hang in there, and we'll get through this. Okay, a little bit on the book of Galatians. Shaul, that's in Hebrew. Paul is his English name. Actually, Paul's his Greek name. So that we have an English equivalent for. Um, he wrote a letter to the Galatian congregations in the region of Galatia, which is a territory and sort of in the north central area of what's modern day Turkey. It was a Roman province at the time, and it was named after the Gauls. Yeah, so and the Gauls also it developed into a people group known as Celts, and the Celts had migrated from Middle Asia into the Macedonian and Turkish areas um, during the Roman times, and later were pushed out by other groups, and they traveled northwest, ended up in Germany, France, and eventually over in England, Ireland, Scotland, and so on. And um, that's where we get the understanding of the people group Celts. Um, and they ended up migrating also to Boston and formed a basketball team. Okay. Anyways, that was the people group that Paul was writing to, not to any one particular congregation, but to a group of congregations in the area of Galatia. The issue in his letter to the Galatians is there's basically three basic main points. One first basic main point to understand is that um, the the reason for the letter, the reason for all the commotion, is that people came up from Jerusalem claiming to be sent as officials from the Jerusalem congregation, which they weren't, um, saying to the Gentiles, "Oh no, you can't be complete yet. You're not part of the family yet. You're not one of us yet. You have to convert to being a Pharisee before you'll be acceptable." And the whole argument in the letter to the Galatians is about you don't need to be a Pharisee to be in the family of God. Um, and so you have, and his proofs for that are it was already known that the Spirit of God was living in the Galatian Gentiles and that miracles were happening around them. So, what would becoming a Pharisee do to add to that relationship with God? The answer is nothing. You can't add to that. You're already living in the gifts that God has provided. You don't need Pharisaism. Okay, and so the whole argument about against Pharisaism it comes out in the terminology of the letter, and where Paul uses the word law. Now, there's 4 different ways in Galatians. I started off this study saying 2. Now I've realized there's 4 different ways that Paul uses the word law in Galatians. Primarily, and the context will tell you what version he's using. So read the context and whenever you see the word law, ask yourself which law are you talking about. First, Paul talks about law as Torah, God's commandments. Torah is Hebrew, of course, meaning the first 5 books of the Bible. All God's instructions, or most all God's instructions, are there in those books. As a result, Torah is also used in a broader sense, meaning the entirety of the Bible is God's Torah. And we even use it in everyday lingo, talking about, reading instructions for something that's if you wanted to, if you bought a bicycle in a box and you want to put it together properly, you read the instructions. We would call that the Torah of the bicycle build. Okay, so so that's also used. So Torah means instruction. Doesn't mean law. It means instruction. So Paul is saying that there's law and there's law. And so you have to look at the version of law that he's using in the context of how he's using it. Specifically, there's a phrase that he uses, the works of the law, specifically talks about Pharisaism and all the rules they add to the lifestyle that is not necessary for holiness, but is part of the religious shtick of being a Pharisee. This is also true in modern Orthodox. You get the same argument. Oh no, you can't be one of us. You can't be good enough yet because you haven't converted. That's a big mess. Here's the problem with why you don't want to convert. Okay, when you take on becoming a Pharisee or becoming Orthodox in modern terms, you take on all the rules and instructions and lifestyle that they bid you to do. And this is Paul's argument to the Galatians. If you take that on, by giving your word that you're going to be following everything they tell you to do, you obligate yourself to doing everything they tell you to do. You can't convert and then revert to being messianic. You can't convert and revert to your old ways. Once you've promised that you're going to do their thing, you've promised to do everything they ask of you, and that's what Paul warns the Galatians about. You don't need that. Okay, if you belong to Messiah, you are already Abraham's seed. We are the descendant of the promise, not the descendant of the flesh. And so these arguments are there that Paul makes to the Galatians. They don't need Pharisaism. Now, going back to the word law for a second, there's a confusion in teaching Galatians that because Paul is disparaging with the word law in a couple cases, they interpret that Paul is against God's written law, his commandments. He wants to throw out the Old Testament and only embrace the New. And that's not the case. The holy lifestyle still requires that we follow God's commands. The difference is we don't need the man-made additions or changes to be holy. And that's the big difference. The problem with Pharisaism of that day and Orthodox of modern times is there's a lot of extra stuff that isn't necessary for true holiness. It's just a big system of many rules that's basically designed to make oneself feel superior to everybody else, and thus is not necessary. It's far less a matter of properly keeping the commandments of God than it is a matter of proving oneself more righteous than others. Okay, and then the final thing also has to do with the conversion process, and this is what Paul is complaining about. Once you convince a Pharisee congregation to let you in as a Gentile to learn to become a Jew, you go through the classes, you pay the money, you do the time, and when the course is done and they decide to accept you, the last things you do is a tevilah, or baptism, where you go down into the water. As a Gentile, you come up a new creation as a Jew, and as a new creation, if you're a guy, which is exactly what Torah says, a baby boys to be circumcised on the 8th day after his birth. The same thing for a Gentile male coming up out of the baptism to become considered a Jew. He needs to have a circumcision within the first 8 days of his new life. And that's the circumcision that Paul's talking about in Galatians. He's not talking about the commandment of circumcision. He's talking about the Pharisaic and modern Orthodox version of circumcision for an adult male. So, those are the three biggest bugaboos with Galatians. If you understand those, if you check the context to make sure that you're understanding the context, then you'll go a long ways to understand what's going on in Galatians. Okay, let's get into our text. Actually, what I want to do is take a running start into our text for the day. We're going to start around verse 11, but I'm going to start on verse 7 just to take a running start to get our context. If you want to go back and study all the stuff that's gone on before, that's there on the it's there in the channel page. Okay, so here we go. Verse 7 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, I need to scroll at the screen. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially of those who are of the household of faith. Okay, so lots of good material in here. If you want to pick up more information on that, you can always look into the previous week's studies. But our text for the day is verses 11 to 14. So here's our text for the day. See with what large letters I have written to you with my own hand. As many as desire to make a good showing in the flesh, these would compel you to be circumcised, only that they may not suffer persecution for the cross of Christ. For not even those who are circumcised keep the law, but they desire to have you circumcised that they may boast in your flesh. But God forbid that you should boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, and whom the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. Okay, we're going to go this far in our text for today. 15. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but a new creation. All right, now let's close this up. Get over to our text for the day. All right, Shalom Ruhama, good to see you. And okay, Seth. First question, comment, rebuke for the day. Thank you for writing. Speaking of baptism, I'd like to study that out here also, here too. I have a view of it that I'd like tested and challenged. Okay. That's easy enough to do. In fact, that's pretty much a one single study event. We can throw that in before we get into halakha. I'll throw that up. Well, it's going to be a couple weeks away before we get to it. But yeah, we can do that. Okay. Let me get over to, whoops, wrong spot. There we are. There's our text. Okay. Galatians 6:c. Okay. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable. Let me change the angle on this. Always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Okay, that's a citation of 1 Corinthians 15, but it's similar to what Paul is saying here in this section. Okay, starting in verse 11. See with what large letters I have written to you with my own hand. Okay, Englishman's Greek New Testament version says, see how large to you letters I wrote with my own hand, with my hand. Okay, Englishman's Greek New Testament. My Greek is terrible, so I like to rely on this because it seems a little bit more word for word exactly as the Greek text lays out. Helps me to pick up the syntax and word order, because sometimes that makes a difference in how you translate something. Okay, and my commentary on this, see what large letters I have written. You think it was something new to do, messages and stuff in all caps. Well, it looks like Paul's doing it way ahead of us. Shaul is doing it way ahead of us. Okay. All right. Commentary. Okay. Last part of our study. My own handwriting. Normally, Shaul's handwriting handwritten greeting is short, since its purpose is to assure his readers that the letter is really from him. This is proved by his calling attention to the large letters he uses. Okay. Another commentary puts this in. Most letters of this length were dictated to scribes who would write small to finish the task quickly. Okay, so you have basically two different ways of reading this. One, he's writing in large handwriting to show his style, or he's writing his, what large letters as in correspondence, what a large piece of correspondence he's writing with his own hand rather than using a scribe. Take it either way you want. Some people suggest that he's writing in large letters because of his eye trouble. I can relate to that nowadays, but none of that's actually clearly stated or purposed. So you have a couple, three different ways of looking at that. All and none of them are probably going to apply at one point or another. So it's one of those issues that, if you want to stay up all night, at Shavuot, studying scripture, reading Torah, I suppose that would be a good discussion to talk about. What exactly was Paul's infirmity that he wrote about? And you can argue all night long about it. Okay. All right, let's move on. Let me check something really fast. Okay. Verse 12. As many as desire to make a good showing in the flesh, these would compel you to be circumcised, only that they may not suffer persecution for the cross of Christ. Okay. Oh, by the way, you guys are already doing it. Thank you very much. But if you have questions, comments, and rebukes, please put them in the typed text. I will, if I can remember, check that frequently and try to bring up to speed everything that goes on. Don't worry if I'm way ahead of you by the time you get something written out. That's okay. I don't mind going back and talking about something I've already covered, especially if what you're asking for is something I didn't specifically cover or cover well enough. Okay, Englishman's Greek. As many as wish to have a fair appearance in flesh, these compel you to be circumcised, only that not for the cross of the Christ they may be persecuted. Okay, that could be a little bit confusing, and hopefully through the commentaries and in my own wit and oh, never mind. We'll figure this out. Okay, having signaled the beginning of the letters end, see verses 1 through 11. Paul, in fact, continues his condemnation of those who would have been troubling his disciples and attempting to transfer their allegiance away from the gospel to a form of social status. Okay, so you have yet another warning about people trying to get you circumcised, that is, people making you convert to Pharisaism, so that by becoming a Pharisee, essentially you walk away from your relationship with Messiah. And in fact, that's what's required in modern Orthodox conversions, and I'm sure was non-messianics coming out to say that you have to become Pharisees in order to be part of the community. They'll do the same thing. They will make you turn away from Messiah, and It's kind of sneaky because in the conversion process, when you're doing your mikvah, part of what they're part of the vows that you're asking you to make is that you forsake any and all forms of God that you knew before. Okay? That is known before their instruction to you, which now clearly does not include Messiah. Um, so the difficulty with that is if you go through with this, then you formally turn away from Yeshua, and thus the offense of the cross disappears because you've forsaken your relationship with Messiah in order to become Jewish or Pharisee or Orthodox. Okay, commentators having signal. We just did that. Okay, good showing. Not even going to try to pronounce that. Meaning a good face. Okay, putting on a good face, as it were. Okay, to make a good showing. In the flesh, perhaps a remez, a hint of verse 4:9, to the extent that the wish for status as a work of the flesh, it returns the Galatians to the position of slaves when they are already and should remain sons adopted through the Spirit, heirs according to the promise. Okay, a remez means a hint, which sort of a hinting back to what he already mentioned, talking about the flesh. Okay, so here's your basic idea here. Okay, good commentary on this. Okay, the Galatians are being compelled to turn away from Paul's teaching to embrace becoming Pharisees, and essentially in the process rejecting a relationship with Messiah and trusting on your works of your own flesh to gain and to maintain your relationship with God, allegedly. In reality, it does nothing of that, but it does give you cause to boast in your own flesh, your own works, your own status, your own activities, that you're holier than others, and especially those Gentiles. Okay. Further commentary. Ritual conversion is taught for one reason, not for unity, for pride. Unity is found only in Messiah. Okay. Remember the Pharisaism for which Yeshua spoke so heavily against, and what Paul is arguing against here, is that people wanted to make good shows of being super religious, and so they became Pharisees, and they had piles and piles and piles of rules and regulations over and above what God had commanded, which they rigorously followed to show that they were better than everybody else. And it shows up in their doctrines. There was a point where the Pharisees had decreed that all Israel was unclean. And so everybody had to go through a cleansing ritual, which only they themselves were really capable of doing because of the stringency and expense. So, so the whole idea of making a declaration that all Israel was unclean, they had to, and only they can clean themselves properly. It's definitely not an act of kindness or charity, but an act of pride and self-indulgence. Okay, so, and we, as we learn to walk in God's commandments, and yes, we're supposed to walk in God's commandments, we who walk in God's commandments need to be careful that we don't adopt that same attitude with one another, especially to those who are new, especially to those who have not been well taught, especially for those that are still struggling with how do you go about keeping these crazy commandments. Those of us who've been after it longer and are much more capable of following it and much more comfortable with it should never look down on somebody who's still learning or still getting the basics. The frank reality is that none of us are perfect. None of us walk completely and totally holy. Therefore, we have no right to complain to one another that they aren't good enough. They're not at my level, so to speak. That is the wrong attitude to have. Okay, but rather we're all still on that learning curve. And just because you're further along the learning curve doesn't give you the right to boast against somebody who's earlier on that learning curve. Um, because you're still on that learning curve too. Okay, so see now I lost my spot again. Okay, okay. Shaul contrasts. Yeah, we did that one, didn't we? Okay, the indent. This is also true for the most current denominations. They would have to they would love to boast of turning you from, can't even read my own stuff, turning you from Torah into following their man-made traditions. And this is where we get a lot of friction with people who are believers but are not walking in a proper understanding of Torah. They'll insist on their man-made traditions, not realizing that they're man-made traditions. And if you ever want to question that, just walk around outside in your neighborhood this time of year, or look in the windows and see. A lot of people deliberately have their curtains parted so you can see what's going on inside. And so there's a lot of man-made tradition going on that realistically has nothing to do with Messiah. It's winter stuff, but it's not Christ-centered, Messiah-centered stuff. It's all winter stuff that's been applied to what is commonly called Christmas. And so there it is. Okay. So let's continue on. True, circumcision is required for all males in Israel, which then signifies that there is no difference between the sojourner and the native Israelite. Circumcision obligates one to obey the commandments of the Torah, but when it becomes a matter of a proper circumcision and one that obligated a person to follow certain customs and obey the commandments of the rabbis, that principle violated the written word of Yehovah, as Yeshua said, and you invalidated the word of Elohim for the sake of your tradition. First century circumcision had taken on a status of a who's who among the religious converts that keep the commandments of the elders. An interesting choice of words there, not the commands of God, but the commands of the elders. If you are not aware of all the rules and regulations of the elders, a great book to look at would be the Mishnah. I'd recommend, if you're really serious about studying the everyday lifestyle of Israel at the time of Messiah, the Mishnah is actually a great snapshot. The Mishnah quotes heavily on teachers and writers from from actually the time before Yeshua through the time of Yeshua for another 100 years or so after Yeshua. Um, but it gives you a great snapshot of the religious life of that time. And so a lot of stuff what Yeshua talks about, he's kind of hinting at because everybody knows what he's talking about. We can read more detail of it in the Mishnah. Okay? And so you have tons of little details pop up once you get it. And it's a great idea of this is, and also gives you an indication of why Yeshua was so dead set against the Pharisees and why Paul in this letter to the Galatians is dead set against the Pharisees and the conversion to Pharisaism capped off by their circumcision. Okay, very, very important. It's not a quick and easy book to read. I have an edited version that's in one big thick book. If you want to read the whole thing, it's 6 volumes. But you can use the shorter book and get the idea, and it'll still give you tons and tons of insights about what's going on in the Brit Hadashah, New Testament, in case you didn't know that. Okay, let me check something. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I'm in good company using large letters in the text. Thank you very much. Yes. And okay. Yeah, and Seth adds his laugh. That was a good one. Yeah, go ahead. Make fun of my condition. Um, and so I think I mentioned it already. First, I was over at the eye doctor's this morning, and he put another shot in one of my eyes. Thank God it's the eye that wasn't seeing very well, anyways, and so it's still a little messy compared to what is normal. But I can still see with one eye and sort of get along. Okay, verse 13. For not even those who are circumcised keep the law, but they desire to have you circumcised that they may boast in your flesh. Okay. Englishman's Greek. For neither they who are being circumcised themselves law keep, but they wish you to be circumcised, that in your flesh they might boast. Okay, I kind of like that syntax. It gives you kind of an idea um, what this really means, and basically stated, um, even those, uh, you know, even those who are circumcised, those who are the Pharisees, or even the modern Orthodox, don't keep the law. And that's the harsh reality. There are commandments in the Torah that God asks of us, tells us we should do, but we don't do. Some of it's out of simple physical necessity, some of it is tradition. And my favorite argument that no one's ever come back on me about so far, someone objects and says, what about what do you mean we keep the commandments? We keep the commandments. All you have to say is ein techelet. Okay, ein techelet b'tzitzit. Okay, there's no thread of azure in your tzitzit. Orthodox wear all white. Okay, that's not the commandment. The commandment is to wear a thread of azure. Okay, now they'll argue, say, oh, we don't know the exact shade. Yeah, you do. There's plenty of archaeological digs that have found places that made this color of blue. And the other argument is, oh, we don't know the process. Well, yeah, you do, because when those digs were dug up, the process was known and showed. So if you demanded to have that exact proper shade, and if you demanded that exact proper process, which, by the way, neither of which are specifically commanded by God, otherwise he'd have said, given you the exact process, it's your tradition that takes it away. Okay, now what is greater, the word of the rabbis or the word of God? So as Messianics, we tend to wear blue in our tzitzit. And depending on how liberal you are about that, some people only wear blue, some people wear black and blue or brown and blue or something, and some wear white and blue. Um, the thread of blue is the functional part. Okay, so what you do with the rest of it, as far as colors are concerned, are not stated. Um, so there's one case in point. Okay, so even if you are of the Pharisees, even if you're of the Orthodox, you don't keep the commandments. Okay. Okay, let's move on. The danger spelled out in Galatians is not returning to the law, quote unquote. It is rather depending on a man made or man thought up way to enter the covenant. We enter by the work of Messiah alone. Okay? Um, and that's really that's kind of the point of the whole letter. Okay? We're not returning to the law. You can't return to something that you've never been to in the first place. So if you know, unless you grew up Jewish or in a family that was cognizant of God's commandments and worked to keep them, you're not returning to the law. Okay, so part one of the argument is already shot there. As far as you know, returning to Torah, uh, show us. The response would be, show us where Yeshua went away from the Torah. When did he argue against it? He argued against Pharisaism, but he didn't argue against Torah. Okay, so um, so our relationship, our entry into the relationship with God is not through our man-made efforts, but through the work of Messiah alone. And you know, that's basically Isaiah 53:10. When you look upon the sacrifice of Messiah and you ask God to make it count for you, He will make it count for you. That's my interpretation of Isaiah 53:10. It's not completely word for word because there's so many word pictures, allusions, and pronouns in that one verse. It's near impossible to translate. You really can't translate it word for word. You have to do the dynamic to just to get the meaning of what's intended there. Okay, move on. At Shaul's time, the Prushim, that is Pharisees, insisted one cannot properly observe the commandments of Torah and be a part of the holy community unless one was circumcised into the Perush tradition. Okay, a Perush is a singular guy, where Prushim are the plural. So it means sanctified ones, I think. The holy ones. Okay. The same argument is presented today by the Orthodox with the same flaw. Even the Orthodox today do not obey the Torah completely or properly. Okay. And that's there's a truth in that. So to convert to follow their ways only adds a huge burden of details on you that is not necessary for your walk with God. Okay. Further commentary. Even those Gentiles who are getting circumcised, becoming non-Messianic Jewish proselytes, and thus putting themselves uponomos in subjection to the system in which results from perverting the Torah into legalism. Okay, that's a long phrase Dr. Stern did. Uponomos simply means under law. Okay, and again, because Paul doesn't differentiate between law and law in his letter, you know, it's not left to individual interpretation, but it's left to context to show you that law is not Torah, God's commandments, but here the law is Pharisaism. The word law is used as Pharisaism. Okay, uponomos. So, but at the time that Dr. Stern was writing his translation, he was really, really laboring with certain terminology that he wanted to make sure that we did not accidentally misinterpret what was meant. So being under law has already been redefined popularly, so he had to use a um, different phrase to say the same thing, but to say it in a manner that you're not going to misinterpret. So you end up with, 14 words being used to make up what is used in 2 words. And also remember, Paul is not writing this letter in a vacuum. This was not. It's not that people didn't know him and probably didn't know his arguments here. So when he's writing these things, uh, if the people hearing his letter would know the context. So when he would say, um, even those Gentiles who are getting circumcised are being put under the law, and not they would know by context he's not talking about God's commandments, but rather putting under Pharisaism as being under the law. Okay, so again, context drives a lot. Okay. Okay. So into perverting the Torah into legalism, citations there, obligating themselves to observe the entire Torah, and again, quotations, the entire Torah, as a Jew. Uh, uh, back up to a previous chapter for reference on that. Don't keep the Torah, even thusly misunderstood. Okay, I'm not reading this well, and it's kind of toothy. Okay, so people that are encouraging to follow the entire body of Orthodox or Pharisaic rules, which they themselves don't follow completely. Another case in point: modern times. Okay, it's considered verboten to drive an automobile on Sabbath. Okay, in the Messianic community, we are too far apart, too spread apart to meet at all if we followed that rule. However, what Orthodox do is, and I've known many Orthodox people who do this, is they will get in their car on Sabbath morning, drive to within a couple blocks of the synagogue, park their car somewhere, and then walk the last couple blocks to the synagogue as if they were walking from home. And people would then see them walking in, not driving a car, and thinking, oh, these people are really righteous. Well, the reality is a little different. They're still driving their cars. So on the contrary, they don't follow their system's rules. The only reason they want you to get circumcised is not so that you will obey the Torah, but so that they can boast of having gained your adherence to them personally or literally, so that in your flesh they may boast. In other words, the scars you're going to be wearing are their badge of honor that they got you to convert to their way. And that's and it's not that they keep the commandments, but rather they'll also teach you to not keep the commandments, the ones they choose to not keep. Okay. The vehemence of Paul's attack against the influencers is precisely because they will not admit that Jesus' death and resurrection affect the sonship of Gentiles. This is a big issue even to today, and even amongst Messianics, there's a certain amount of argument here, um, and this is a difficulty. Um, you know, if you were to go to an Orthodox synagogue today, or this coming Shabbat, walk in and says, "I want to become a member and participate in the congregation, but I want to remain a Gentile," they'll just give you a little giggle and usher you back out the door. Um, However, in Messianic circles, um, there are still some large organizations that still take that point of view that the Gentile does not have full citizenship in their organizations. Um, uh, there's one group that says that you can join, but but if you vote, you're only a half a vote and you're only a half member. And another group says that you're just a second class citizen, and suck it up and get used to it. And that's really sad that someone would do that, especially since we have a strenuous explanation here in Paul's writing that you don't have to convert to nothing to be part of God's family, but rather embracing what Yeshua has done for you is all you need to do to be part of the family. But you have people dragging some of their stuff in from where they came and dragging it into the doctrines of their organizations, which is, by the way, if you ever wonder why we're not members of any larger organization, that's why. Over the years, in fact, one particular group even started pressing the idea that Gentiles need to make a conversion to Messianic, and that they would not be acceptable without that conversion to Messianic. I don't know why that a Gentile wouldn't just you know um, you know turn their Bible to Galatians and demand that the leadership of that group read it and apply it. Everything they say about Pharisaism, it means talks about them. Okay, let me check one last time. Oops, I made a mistake there. Come here, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Okay. Oops. There we go. Yay. Okay. Let's move on then. Verse 14. Oops. Start at the top again. All right, I'll do the whole thing over. There we are. Okay. Verse 14. But God forbid that I should boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. But for me may it not be to boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom to the world through whom to the world has been crucified, and I the world. Okay. Greek syntax. Okay. Okay, crucified, meaning dead, meaning dead. Okay. Dead as defined as no need for circumcision to belong to God. You are already there. Okay. If you are dead to the world, you are already in everything you need to walk successfully in Messiah. Okay. If you've turned away from the ways of the world, basically it means be dead to the world. Okay. What obligation has Torah over a dead person? Okay. What obligation? Okay. None, in that in that same manner, the complete work of Messiah, his death and resurrection, removes our obligation to follow the man-made rules of Pharisaism or modern orthodoxy. Okay? Now, a little picture to help understand this. Okay? In a traditional Jewish funeral, what they will do in preparation for preparing the body for burial is the body will be dressed up as a, like they like to dress people up, but they will also put on his tallit, what we wear on Sabbath, and when they put on the tallit, they clip the tzitzit off the tallit, and they leave the clipped tzitzits in the casket, but they clip the tzitzit. The point is, you're dead. You're no longer on an obligation to follow the commands of Torah. Okay, why? Because you're already in the presence of Hashem. You're already in God's presence, and there's no fleshly resistance to cover God's to prevent you from walking in God's way. So because go back. So this is so when you're dead, you're dead. You're no longer on obligation because you're no longer reactive to the stimuli of the world. Okay? And that's the original, Numbers chapter 15. That's the original context. You were to wear the tzitzit because we got distracted with things we wanted to do and not with what God wanted us to do. And so we needed a constant reminder. So we're given the tzitzit to do that. Okay. So so when you're dead, you're dead. Okay, there's nothing more to do in this world. Okay. Yeshua and his execution stake are supposed to represent obedience to the written Torah in its context. Anything else is mankind's attempt to become religious. Okay. But true religion is found only in obedience, and it is written in the Hebrew text of Deuteronomy 33:2. From his right hand went a fiery religion for them. For Jews, their bondage is in Pharisaic law. For Gentiles, their bondage is in all religious law and customs handed down by their self-seeking masters. Okay, and this is a true reality in both circumstances. We have baggage; they have baggage. Jews have baggage. Judaism has baggage. Gentiles have baggage. Even Messianic Judaism has baggage. Christianity has baggage. And we need to chuck the baggage, throw out the stuff that is not helpful. And so we have to be careful about that we do things for the proper reason and in the proper fashion. Okay, and that includes not looking down on somebody who's new, not looking down on somebody who doesn't got it together, and not loading up somebody with a whole bunch of rules and regulations that are not at all part of God's commandments. Okay. Okay. In a comment against the Prushim's boasting in circumcisions made, kind of like, I don't know, like wearing scalps under your belt. Shaul boasts Messiah's sacrifice removes him and the Galatians from any such need. Okay, and in the context of joining the Pharisaism of that day or the Orthodox of today, we are removed from any such need for that because we already have everything we need for our relationship with God. We have the Spirit in us. Miracles happen around us. And if you're not seeing miracles happen around you, pray and ask for God to make miracles happen around you and through you. And that you get to be involved in these miracles happening as much as you get to see them happen. If you're not seeing those, ask for it. Ask, and God will provide. He promises to provide. Okay? All right. Shaul contrasts his exceptional credentials, such as in Philippians 3, 4-6, to the Prushim, the Pharisees, and then says the greatest source of authority is found in embracing the sacrifice of Messiah. For boasting, also take a look at Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah 9, verses 23-26. Okay. Our greatest authority is Messiah. You think, well, wait a second. What about the Bible? Well, what did Yeshua teach us? Okay. He authorized us to keep the commandments of the Bible. He authorized us to study the Bible and to follow what the Bible teaches. So when we follow the Bible, we follow the instructions of Messiah. Okay. And then finally, the world has been crucified. Okay. The draw and need to take the Pharisee conversion, that is the world, is an aversion to Shaul and it to him. Okay. So now if Paul identifies himself as in Philippians as the Jew of Jews, the Pharisee of Pharisees, not was, but is, what's he talking about then here? He's saying that even though his religious practice is the most stringent of all, he does not require that of anybody. Only obedience to God's commandments, as written. So, and so the ways of the world, in this case, Pharisaism, or by extension, Orthodox, is dead to him, and he to them. So what he's saying is, Pharisaism means nothing, and it has no desire to, and there is no desire to become, for a Gentile to become a Pharisee. Okay. Same thing with Orthodox. Orthodox offers nothing, and we have nothing to gain by becoming Orthodox. Okay. That's it for our study. Okay, I need to move this to the right spot. There we are. Okay, good. I'm okay, really. What it is, still haven't. I don't think my computer backlights at all. So my all the letters and stuff on my keys, I can sort of read if there's enough light on it, but a lot of times there isn't, especially at nighttime. So that's why I'm struggling sometimes moving from screen to screen, because my big fat fingers are landing in one spot or another other than where they should be. Okay, any other questions, comments, rebukes before we close down? If you have anything to add in, go ahead and type it in, and I'll get to it. In the meantime, let me do my closing shtick here. Again, you've been listening to Simchat Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. My name is Gene, and we meet every Shabbat for prayer service and Bible study and all around good fun and hanging out together. Also food. Oh, did I mention food? Yes. Okay, you can get that information off the website. Our website is simchatyeshua.org, and that's spelled SIMCHATYESHUA.org. We also have a Facebook page, Simchat Yeshua, and I didn't mention it before, I'll mention it now. If you want to support the channel, if you like what you see and hear here, especially since I don't have my face on a video, it looks a whole lot better this way. Um, um, anyways, make a short story long. If you want to support the channel, if you want to support the congregation, you have a means on the website to do so. Um, okay, I think that covers most of it. I'm going to go quiet for a couple minutes. I just want to make sure that I don't chop the video. I know there's a delay um, from when I speak to when you hear, and so I want to make sure that I don't cut that off by chopping off the feed too soon. So if you have nothing else to add, I'll go quiet now. In a couple minutes from now, I'll just shut it off without any further ado. So God bless you. Shalom. And we'll see you next week, every Wednesday, 6 o'clock California time, right here on this channel. Thank you. God bless you. Shalom. All right, that's it. Shalom.